Howdy, all you delicious people. You know what? The last couple days, I've kind of been mowing over a story. Because when looking at it, I'm like, you know what? How about we just approach this? Because it hasn't been done yet. And so I'm thinking, like, hey, let's put my idea, let's throw this out in the hat. I've been watching a lot of Power Rangers seasons so far. And ultimately, not every single episode, but I've kind of watched them kind of quite frequently, so I kind of know like kind of ins and outs of some things. And so let's talk about my ideas. Let's ultimately break this whole down. So the reason why I have the logo Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is for a significant reason. Here is my idea. And ultimately, at any point, people will moan and groan about any of the ideas I have. But come with me on this journey, because maybe you'll enjoy something about this season, and then you'll be like, oh my god, this is going to build to this? Interesting. So, ultimately, this season might be called any number of things. Probably easily enough, it might be called Power Rangers 1984. Because we are going to go into 10 years before Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 1994 becomes a thing. So we are going to backtrack 10 years. I don't know if it's exactly going to be 10, but F it. It's going to be a post Mighty Morphin Power Rangers timeline. And with that, I hope when I say the word time period piece, that Power Rangers doesn't take that to the upper echelons to just go, yeah, time period piece, that means we gotta time period the heck out of this. We gotta mention every little detail about anything of the 80s or early 90s to the heavens. Like we gotta do an entire episode basically just all around a certain thing of the 80s and or early 90s, which I pray that's not the case. But knowing full well, more than likely, I'm sure everybody will just immediately say, it's like, well, it's all nostalgia. It's nostalgia for the 80s. Here's my thing. We are going to have two people come into the past from the future. One person is going to be a hero of sorts, and one person, of course, is going to be the arch nemesis, the main villain of this story, and I will justify why this is. So, here is my thing. We're going to be doing a ton of fan service from maybe some shows that you maybe not even know exist, or that reasonably some people will just be like, that's going to be the story? Oof. Like, I never really liked this season, or I never really liked this. I don't know who this character is. Ba 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 ba. Why are you going into this story? You know how long this show was before? You know what? I'm going to approach this as an Avengers Endgame like approach. Like, if we're going to go into every single Power Ranger season and just pull from things, that's what we're going to do in a very time travel like way. So, anyways, the main tie-in that we are, of course, going to have is the conclusion of Zordon when he was in Power Rangers in Space. We're going to get to the conclusion of what happens to Zordon in Power Rangers in Space. We're going to get that conclusion, and we're going to tie it into the reason why we are in 1984 before this whole thing kicks off. And we are going to have a tie into a Ranger who never had his story really resolved. We never really quite figured out who this person is. And so now I want to finally conclude this character within this story and start to really drive things home. So we are going to be tipping the hat to some transitional things within the season. So ultimately, we're going to give you some familiar things, but ultimately, like, packaged differently, let's just say. Ultimately, a lot of people might just say that this is kind of like the Star Wars Episode 1 approach of things, or the Star Wars Episode 2 or 3 of things, but F it. Like, this is probably going to be very interesting to people, or maybe just something that no one wants to approach. At the end of the day, it's probably going to be on some streaming service somewhere, probably. So either way, anyways, let's go into this. So we have it to where technology, reasonably Alpha and Zordon had this bizarrely high level of technology for a time period it does not make sense in. So here is my play. What happens is that we have it to where a architect from the future comes to the past and ultimately assembles every single command center that you've ever seen through Power Rangers, with a few exceptions here or there. So every single season, there is one person that comes back to the past and builds some command center of some sorts, knowing full well a lot of the time supposedly Alpha is usually tied to these things. Now we're going to actually cement that it's not just going to be Alpha, it's somebody from the future that has no fan service like Ty. It's just a guy that comes there and ultimately just builds the command center, and most of the time just leaves to come back to his time, or otherwise just leaves or stays because it's just convenient for him to just stay in a time period. Or maybe at some points there is only one true, like, one route for this person to come back to a time, but then not go back into his present day. I don't know. Justifiably, it is what it is. So we have one person who is coming back with 4 other alphas. And 4 alphas to put this command center together. So basically, we are going to do a tip of the hat of Alpha 4, not Alpha 5. But justifiably, sure enough, there's going to be a reason for that. More than likely, we can kind of joke, how many numerous times have there been an Alpha? Like, there's been an Alpha 5, Alpha 6, Alpha 70, 100 billion. And so ultimately, we can justify now that when looking at it, we can justify people, instead of it being an alien race that just creates all this technology, how about somebody coming from the future to ultimately put these command centers together? Because ultimately we can kind of very much kind of retcon a lot of things and this and that. Yeah, we can still have the whole space travel thing. To ultimately, it's like, well, hey, like, then how is it that they eventually get Zordon here and this and that? This person from the future is going to have some future knowledge, but then again, more than likely he doesn't have every single bit of things here and there, and justifiably, maybe him personally, he doesn't exactly, like, he is trying to almost retcon your entire season for you. Basically, what he is going to do is, at some points, this character from the future is ultimately going to get to a point of ultimately going into, well, hey, maybe instead of having to get Zordon, maybe I can try to get other people before I get to Zordon, and then ultimately I'm just forcibly, like, stuck with having to get Zordon, and then it works out. Ultimately, yeah, like, so what happens is we have this person who is building the command center, and all while building the command center, and here's the thing, we are not going to do, like, a kind of tip of the hat to having a younger Zach, Tommy, Jason, Billy, whatever. I don't know if any of this stuff I've already said before, but because I've tried to do this numerous times to try to get the story right. So we're not going to do a younger Power Rangers. No, if anything, we're just going to do a different Power Ranger people via a time period. So that's what we're doing with. Like, it's kind of be in a lot of ways a feel of, like, if you've ever watched the show or if you've ever heard the show, kind of like Krypton. Like, yeah, eventually we are going to cameo in, like, some characters that, of course, is like maybe a Zach or a Trini or a Jason or whatever, but, like, they are not going to actually be suiting up within this series, and ultimately people might just like, oh, what? No. More than likely, if this goes well, maybe we'll retcon the entire thing, and then it'll just be a younger Power Rangers going and being the Rangers, but and then we'll just do an entire reboot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in 1994. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, if this is hugely successful, you never know about things, and you never know about Power Rangers, how they just want to blatantly retcon everything. So, here's the thing. We are going to have this person who is eventually going to build this command center, but then eventually there's going to be some action in this series. There's going to be a short build-up here in the early parts, but then eventually we're going to get to everything that everyone knows and loves. Minion fights, like, we're gonna have, like, minions, we're gonna have monsters, we're gonna have Zords, we're gonna have it all. It's just this slow build up of, okay, we gotta get a little bit of story out to help you understand where things are coming from. So, and ultimately the reason why we're coming to different kind of alphas, because alphas don't quite work out that well. Alphas break down really easily, I guess. Like, man, those robots, you gotta go through a billion of them. Like, probably 55 of them or whatever. Anyways, so going into this, we also have a villain that also has future knowledge. And this villain's goal is to ultimately make it so Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the season everyone loves, never happens. Because ultimately, this character desperately wants this thing to never start. And he has a vital reason why, or a just selfish reason why. Because justifiably, this person has a really big tie to things, and justifiably so. So, the villain of this story, here's what we are going to do. This villain is going to kick off or have some ties to otherwise a bigger backstory than more than likely we will probably have time for in this show. Because ultimately, more than likely, it's probably going to have to go into just a big boatload of flashbacks and just eventually getting to current time. because I don't think that this whole thing is going to like really just have to like be boiled down into everything. So it would take too long. So this main villain ultimately has some really big grudge with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and it kicking off. So this person ultimately goes back in time to ultimately, at first, talk to the father of Goldar. And I know a lot of people groan. So, like, Goldar has a father? Like, why not just talk to Goldar? There's a reason for that, believe me, because ultimately we kind of have to, like, we have to have our own certain seasonal stuff, and then eventually we will tip to the hat to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It's going to happen, believe me. More than likely, maybe Goldar is in the background somewhere, but, like, yeah, it's going to be Goldar's father in this story. Believe me, there's reasons. Like Goldar's father is getting kind of old. He's realizing that his time is starting to run out, but he still got it, and so ultimately he is not going to exactly hand over the throne. Let's just say just yet. So Goldar's father, maybe his name will probably be Chromedar. That'd be interesting. I don't know. It could be a. I don't know. Like, what other kind of metal names could we have? Like, probably some people might just say it's like, dude, don't call him Chromedar. That sounds lame. No. I don't know. I don't know. It could sound cool. I don't know. Chromedar. I don't know. But anyways, so Chromedar. I'm going to keep calling him that. I don't know if people like it or not. So we have Chromedar, who ultimately is getting future technology, uh, and ultimately is so overwhelmingly appreciative of this main villain giving him future technology that he is basically giving him resources to be able to mass an empire, because reasonably Chromedar basically has just really like on his world, or in his in his world, like he basically already has an empire, and so reasonably like we have it to where uh, our main villain is letting him know about like what he is going to do, like what his plan is, and ultimately Chromedar is like, you know what, like that actually sounds pretty good. Like if anything, like you're telling me that you are a person that has knowledge of the future. So you are going to be able to tell me exactly how I die. This main villain won't have that knowledge, but like it's kind of a whole thing to get Chromedar to follow this main villain. So it's like if you have every single knowledge of the future on you, which he doesn't, but we're placating to this. So, like, I am going to otherwise tie myself onto you for however long that you live because you have knowledge of the future. You have knowledge of when exactly I'm going to die. So ultimately, I am going to follow you to the end of your days, and so on and so forth, because you smart reasons. Anyways, for survival like reasons. So we have it to where this main villain is heading his way to Earth 1984. And so reasonably this guy is going to build up his empire either close to Earth or on Earth. I highly doubt it's going to be on the moon, like Rita did. Like, justifiably, I just, like, more than likely, if Goldar just has a way of easily just kind of accumulating everything and transitioning to another planet that's close to Earth, then by golly, that's what we do. But anyways, Chrome Dart, yeah. Anyways, so or we can just teleport. Easily do that. Just teleport reasonably, I guess. Because ultimately, like all people would just need to do is just teleport. I think the teleport thing will just work all the time because future technology. So we have it to where this main villain is taking an empire and taking it against this person that is going to build this command center in 1984. So basically, at first, we are going to have this guy eventually, like, seemingly try to fight off things on his own, but then he is, of course, going to realize that he is going to need more help. So he is just going to recruit random people that have been nice to him via 1984. And then eventually, he's forcibly going to have to tell them at some point that he is a man from the future, because ultimately we have said same villain that ultimately is from the future as well. So it's going to have to forcibly come up. So this man who is ultimately going to be building up this command center, we will find out that this man is a distant relative to Andros. Because Andros was a human from Power Rangers in space. So ultimately, he's not gonna, like, he's not from some alien race somewhere. It's not like he's gonna live to 1 billion or whatever. But we are going to have a video thing of Andros talking to this guy, confirming like why he's there, and it's gonna be a nice, neat little fan service nod kind of moment to ultimately tell our person that is building this command center, like, hey, to make up for for the wrongs that I have done, I am sending you here, my ancestor, to this time to create this command center. So basically, not a brick thing built. Ultimately, they are going to have to build this thing. They're going to have a bunch of robots building this thing. And eventually, you're going to have a bunch of Alpha 5s just all walking around. But it's not going to look exactly like the Alpha 5 that you probably know. It's probably going to be looking like kind of a blander variation of certain Alpha 5s. More than likely, it might have Alpha 5s have like different kind of colors, different kind of schemes. It's not going to just all be Alpha 5s that all have the lightning bolt on their chest, and that is what it is. So, going into this, yeah, we are going to have Alpha 5s all just kind of, or Alphas, all scrambling around starting to build the command center, and this guy is going to be telling them exactly what to do. At some point, he's going to instruct the alphas to eventually go to certain planets to retrieve this planet's mentor from an alien place. And because ultimately, like, I guess you couldn't just easily find a mentor from this planet because justifiably no human being would understand all of this stuff and take it in and do it. You have to find the right person for the right job. And this is, of course, a person that is not from this planet because they would never understand it. So it has to be an alien mentor from another planet. So here's the thing. justifiably, a lot of people will say, like, okay, how is it that Zordon originally had gotten into that whole tube situation? Well, I have a whole backstory of that, and I think on planet Altar, basically that's how they bury their dead. Basically, like everybody has gravestones, uh, everybody has like statues or monuments of a certain person dying. What I think Altar does is when a person dies, they just put them in the, of course, test tube that Zordon has been in, and that's what they do. Like when a person dies, so that's how they kind of keep him still alive, but justifiably like he's just kind of just dead or kind of just to be monumented and this and that. So, anyways, the main villain. Now we are going to have to tell you who this main villain is because this is going to be a big, interesting aspect. So, ultimately, I would assess that it's like, well, it could just be any number of people that could be a villain in this story. We could have any number of time period jumps from anybody, anywhere. But I think there is a much more interesting story that was never told. So, here is my play. We have in a season called Power Rangers Turbo. Yeah, that show. We have a ranger called the Phantom Ranger. And his story was never concluded. He was in Power Rangers Turbo, and he was also in Power Rangers in Space for an episode, I believe. Because ultimately, I had seen his episode in Power Rangers in Space. I had watched the pilot of Power Rangers in Space to understand exactly how did Zordon get to be where he was. So here is my play. The Phantom Ranger ultimately can live forever, and there is a reason for that. This person does not age, and there's a reason for that. So, the Phantom Ranger is not going to be the person that comes back and builds the command center. He is going to be the person that is going to be the villain of this story. Again, anybody would probably just say click because like, no, I don't want this. No, there's an entire reason for that. Because here's the thing. The Phantom Ranger was to be mysteriously made as any number of people. Quite easily, a lot of people would say that the Phantom Ranger was one, the spirit of every single Power Ranger from a previous season, which does not make sense at all. When looking at it, none of the other Power Rangers died with the maybe a true exclusion of maybe the actor that had played Trini. That would be kind of interesting if ultimately, like, the Phantom Ranger would have been Trini this entire time, or maybe they would have done justifiably some nod to Trini and ultimately say that she was some ranger that was never unmasked. Could have done it. Could have done it. Should have done it, but you didn't. I think at some points they probably had a legendary battle where they did have like Trini quasi in the background, but it could have been like Aisha. It could have been any number of whoever else was the Yellow Ranger at whatever time. So, could have been Aisha, could have been. But, anyways, so it was never shown. So, here's my thing. Ultimately, the Phantom Ranger was ultimately said was Billy Cranston, which, one, if we're going to do a time period, time travel like thing, Billy is going to have to be like 1 billion years old and dead. To be brutally honest, I would love to see David Yost back into the Power Rangers world as anything, but when looking at it, like, I don't think he can make that trip logically. So here is the last play. The Phantom Ranger, from a lot of people, would ultimately say that the Phantom Ranger was Zordon's son. And here is my question. One, why did it take so long for them to do a thing with quite possibly Zordon's son? Why wait till Power Rangers Turbo? You could have easily come in on any earlier seasons or this and that. But here's my play. At the end of the day, the Phantom Ranger is going to go back in time for selfish reasons to stop Mighty Morphin Power Rangers from ever happening, so that way Zordon doesn't come to Earth to be with the Power Rangers, ultimately sticking him on Altar and keeping him there. But ultimately knowing full well both Zordon and Zordon's son had both died at the same time. Ultimately, I could kind of speculate what had happened is that if Zordon is going to be an original Red Ranger, like the movie that Bryan Cranston does, we could ultimately have it be that maybe Zordon's son was trying to do some kind of in a like kingdom like sense. Maybe Zordon's son was trying to get married off to Rita to have a peace treaty be made. Because ultimately, when looking at it, I don't know the justifiable age difference between Zordon and Rita. More than likely, it's probably the same thing, but either way, it doesn't really matter when it comes down to Kingdom. Anybody could eventually just get married to anybody to just solve all these things. So, ultimately, Zordon's son could have maybe tried to get married to Rita, and then maybe he really did it like Rita, and so maybe that's where the friction started to really happen, because Zordon saw a change in his son, and ultimately that is the reason why that ultimately justifiably Zordon never took him with him and made him a ranger, because reasonably it had to take Zordon's son a long time to eventually accept that Rita is off doing other things and off being with Lord Zed and this and that. And so reasonably that is the reason why ultimately he's just mowed over things and just been a hero for his father. But when Zordon ultimately had otherwise died in Power Rangers in Space, spoiler, it's been out for a while, that drove the Phantom Ranger to go back to his old ways, knowing that Zordon has no real control over him because he is, of course, legitimately dead. And so now the Phantom Ranger is driven to insanity because reasonably, one, he was so bitter that the Power Rangers had basically forced his father to no longer exist. So, within the terms of evening it out, the Phantom Ranger is going back in time to make it so that the Power Rangers never existed as well, wiping them completely off the board to ultimately have Zordon still in Altar and completely and utterly safe. So, ultimately, maybe we could have really just had it to where ultimately Zordon was no longer at Altar, and like whatever the future person was going to come back to try to get Zordon, the Phantom Ranger could have just gone back in time a little bit longer earlier to then prevent this person from getting Zordon. But whenever these two people were going to come at the same simultaneous time, that's just how things were going to forcibly have to work. Any single time that Phantom Ranger would go back further, so would this other guy. So it kind of has to just ultimately say that it's like, well, it's a moot point. Any of this stuff is inevitably going to happen anyways. So it has to be written this way. So, because ultimately this guy needs to get this mentor figure, and that has to be Zordon. So he's going to do whatever he has to do to get Zordon, because this is the only mentor from another planet that is going to work. So, we have it to where the Phantom Ranger is ultimately not going to be the Phantom Ranger in this show. The Phantom Ranger thing is going to be a transition into a real villainous looking character that I hope looks really, really cool. Because all people love how Lord Zed looked, and basically that character is so iconic looking and stuff like that. I hope to eventually have this character transition into a very menacing looking character that everyone will be fully accepting of, and I would not accept it just being the Phantom Ranger is just back into is just the Phantom Ranger this entire time. The suit, I think, was always to transition him into something else. And plus, ultimately, the Phantom Ranger didn't have full-fledged control of his power. It seems like a lot of times he would phase in and out from what I saw on the show, and because ultimately knowing full well I saw the premiere episode of him being on the show, so it didn't really ever seem like his powers consistently worked all that well. So that's because this was like a prototype suit that eventually he's going to cementingly actually get into a real suit. So, and that suit is going to look very awesome, I hope. So, we have two people with future knowledge that are butting heads going against one another, and I think that is the real reason why eventually they at some point might cancel one another out. But even if that happens, ultimately still you'll have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers coming down the pipeline to ultimately be that thing that comes next. And then also when looking at it, it's like there'll never be a history thing of any of these things, because ultimately maybe it'll counter one another out. Plus, all of this is to set up for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So, interestingly enough, I guess maybe. Anyways, so we have it to where Phantom Ranger, and I don't know what his persona is going to be in the show. I hope it'll sound really cool and this and that. What are the Power Rangers going to look like in this season? Well, I don't want to go backpedaling into having them be dinosaurs. No. I don't want them to be like, oh, let's just have them as Tyrannosaurus Rex, Mastodon, and whatever, and then just pass all these coins off to the next person. No. I don't want that at all. Um, I also just don't want like when looking at it now, I don't want another just dinosaur like season. Here's my play, because I don't think this is done enough. Ultimately, you can say, well, what is Mystic Force? Here's my thing. Ultimately, like, it kind of gets down to the point where there's been like too many themed kind of things that have repetitively happened. And so here's my play. I kind of want there to just be a season of mythical Power Rangers. You can have Zords that are otherwise tied to these things, and really, not everything has to be exactly specific to whatever. Basically, you can just have fun with playing into the whole story of these interesting Esh looking characters being done through interesting different ways, and this and that. So, like, say for an example, like basically, like, and I hope this isn't gonna like verbatim be the things that exactly they do, because I would like to just kind of throw like very interesting things out there. So, like, basically, for example, like we have certain characters that I think had been used in like Mystic Force, like a Minotaur or something like that. Um, there had at some point been a Manticore Zord at some point, probably within another season at some point. But anyways, like I want to do kind of characters that it doesn't feel like it's been done on the show. Like ultimately, it would be kind of interesting to do like characters that if you Googled images of, like they would kind of look pretty sweet, pretty cool. Maybe like a Leviathan or a like a hippogriff or a people are just like, what is any of this? Maybe like a pegasus or or any kind of just mythological creature that hasn't been done on the show. As long as you could easily pronounce any of these names, because ultimately when looking at it, like I would just backpedal and just say, well, how about you just do animals that have been extinct? You could do that as well. You could very much build an entire show off of, okay, well, hey, these are some really rare animals that were extinct at some point. Or maybe you could have certain mammals or certain characters that existed during the Jurassic period, but ultimately like were like not the common like T-Rex and Mastodon and all of this stuff. Like kind of when researching things randomly, I would of course pull out the card of I always wanted to just do a megalodon like character, because I just think a shark character looks cool. Ultimately, knowing Power Rangers Wild Force did a shark character, but I don't want the visuals of what that was to be what this is. Um, I would easily like pull like any kind of random-ish like dinosaur that could maybe be visually interestingly cool, and the name doesn't sound extremely hard to pronounce. I was thinking of Dimorphodon. I was looking at uh, some other like dinosaurs, like a di dicynodont, which ultimately has a ancestry of being related to elephants. Um, but it doesn't look anything like an elephant. It kind of looks like a barrage of different kind of, like it's four like separate uh it has four separate animals that like, but I want to ultimately have like one specific one that ultimately has a very interesting look. Uh like teamed like basically scour the globe to find any dinosaur that looks interestingly enough and doesn't have a name that's super hard to pronounce. But that's not what I want to do. I just think that ultimately it might be cool to do like a myths and or legends show. Not meaning that you have to have Yeti Ranger or something like that, or Bigfoot Ranger or something like that, but maybe people will get a good chuckle out of that, and maybe I don't know. Maybe we could have like a Gargoyle Ranger or a Goblin Ranger or a uh, which ultimately could be fun. A Griffin Ranger, which ultimately I think we've had a Griffin Zord, but not a Griffin Ranger. Different. We've had a guy that has the last name Griffin, but yeah, different. So like me kind of really kind of coming up with ideas like instead of like how about we go with some myth and legends that hasn't been done, like a Leviathan, like a like a Medusa esh like character. I'm not saying do Medusa, but like do like uh maybe like Leviathan, Hydra, any myth and legends character that you've ever heard of in your life maybe could quite possibly be a character on this show. So yeah, that's kind of my play to kind of go into here, because when looking at this, if you have a set of Power Rangers that are not supposed to be set in a timeline, here's the way to get people to not be welcome to these Power Rangers by having them look like Power Rangers that would probably scare the crap out of you. Ultimately, to where you would probably see any number of these Power Rangers and run away, because every single one of them are characters that look scary, that look creepy, that ultimately look like interesting. But then again, you're just like, dude, I am walking away from that thing. And so reasonably, these people will not know that Power Rangers already exist until 1994, or until it gets to the point where they are absolutely 100% pushed into the public. And then that'll probably be the climax or the finishing up, maybe, of this story. Um, we're going to try to, as much as humanly possible, do a Power Rangers that is going to try as much as possible to do things stealthily, to try to do things to where ultimately they are not going to want themselves completely be known. So this is kind of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles way of doing things. It's not like the blatantly Power Rangers things where they are all gonna desperately want to get their picture taken and be on some uh, be at some like party thrown for them somewhere where they're gonna get the key to the city or whatever. No, that's not how we're gonna do things. And then maybe eventually they will eventually just forcibly just say like, you know what, like, what is the point of having these powers if nobody like even knows that you are protecting their lives? And so justifiably we might have to forcibly go into the crux of having it be that these people are going to make themselves known and ripple the timeline, because reasonably this future character that is going to be the hero wants nothing to do with this time period, because he has already been in a distant future. And when looking at that, like, he kind of feels like this time period doesn't have relevancy for him. Basically, for him, he is probably just going to be a person to do his job and then eventually go back home. So, reasonably, at some points, he's probably counting down the days to where eventually he can leap his way back home. Ultimately, handing this off to another set of people, and ultimately he can go back home. Maybe he has a family, maybe he has a maybe he has something of a reason to go back home to. And so recently, however old this person is, whoever this person is, eventually that's the taper off moment. So going into this, and then maybe you can kind of get rid of any number of people. Maybe any number of people are going to go with him into the future. Maybe you'll have the entire team go with him into the future and then justify that, like, yeah, this whole team doesn't exist because they exist in the distant future now. And so now you have a bunch of 1980 something like people that are all going to be in a future, which they're like, whoa, hey, yeah, this is future. And ultimately, like, reasonably for any number of these people, pretty much all of them won't have a real tying into the future that actually matters, because more than likely our main our main hero will probably know exactly that this person doesn't have any like political aspects, or doesn't go on to be the mayor of any town or whatever. It just, this person doesn't make any lick of anything with their lives, so justifiably maybe that is the real reason why this guy chooses this person to be a Power Ranger, to ultimately do a Legends of Tomorrow like thing, to where their life doesn't have a big impact in this future. So, which ultimately we can eventually retcon this at some point, because, like, a person going from the future to the past is going to have a lot of ripples, a lot of time ripples. When looking at it, like, yeah, it's like we might end up just doing like a Star Trek like way of just of reasonably that there was so much stuff done with somebody coming from the future to the past that ultimately destroyed a lot of things and changed a lot of things. So, anyways, or stuff could just pop off regardless. So, going into this, yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to say, and I probably took, holy crap, I took 50 to bust all this story out and just kind of like dip into a lot of the stuff. So here's the things that I want to mention. We're going to have a little bit of ties to the time period because there might be some interesting characters that we're going to make out of this. More than likely, the minions of, because we have to have like specific minions to our main Zordon son like character. Maybe we'll just call him like Zordon, because ultimately Zordon, like, the Zordon that we know is dead, so maybe we'll just call him Zordon, like basically like Zordon Jr. So more than likely his name might just be Zordon. Funny enough, I think the credit of the Phantom Ranger was Alex Dodd, so maybe that's the Phantom Ranger's name. I don't know. Um, Ultimately, I think. Uh, oh yeah, I think that ultimately might be the play of this and that. So going into this, yeah, we we're gonna go into this, and basically we're gonna have some characters that are otherwise tied to the period, the time, a little bit. The minions, a lot of times. Uh, Here's the thing. Chrome Dar is ultimately going to have some things that, of course, you know and love. But here's the thing. So, Chrome Dar is ultimately going to have a younger version of Squat and Babu. But here's the thing. He is also going to have a younger version of Finster, and there is a reason for that. Here's the thing. So, ultimately, Chrome Dar is going to have a lot of inventors to give to Zordon's son, to ultimately have him create a ton of monsters. So ultimately, there are going to be some drawing board like monster creators. And so ultimately, Squat and Babu are ultimately going to come on to this thing and lie that they can create monsters because they actually can't. But they lied about this just to get them off uh, Chromdar's planet. And so they desperately lied to ultimately get Zordon's son to keep them there, to keep him there, and so ultimately Goldar or Zordon's son just says, "Well, fine, like we'll just keep him on there, keep him here. Maybe we'll have some use for them," and that never really and truly happens. So they're gonna be there. They're gonna have younger variations of them, but reasonably they're not going to be showcased all the time. Basically, like Zordon's son might just like lock them up for lying, and eventually, maybe when Rita comes back, she like unlocks them and frees them, um, or maybe eventually once we get Goldar in here, Goldar is going to eventually free them and this and that because ultimately turning of the ties and whatever, justifiably. So, Finster is not going to be the person that is going to create monsters. Ultimately, this Finster is going to be a guy in the background who is just like he is working on his craft, but ultimately like he's taking a while. Like he's like just kind of in the running to be a person to ultimately create these monsters. And then we're going to have one or two other people that are going to be creating monsters for Zordon's son. Because quite easily, Zordon's son is going to be a real, true, legitimate threat that is not going to take crap from anybody. And if something isn't going to work, eventually he is just going to start getting rid of people. And when I say get rid of people, I mean really get rid of people. Like I mean like pack your bags, like you're done. Freaking like you failed me too often, so boots to you, you're out of here. So, which will make this a very interesting show. So, we're going to have two creators that are ultimately going to create things for for Zordon's son, and ultimately the minions are going to be from the time. So the minions that I'm thinking are not going to be putties, they're ultimately going to be Walkman. Because Walkman from the time period of the 80s was a fairly popular device. So when looking at it, I'm like, how about we have the minions just be Walkman and quasi look like the device, but ultimately, like, they're not exactly going to be, like, walking around like a bunch of boxed like figures. Basically, they're going to mimic the look of a Walkman, but it's going to look like a normal person fighting the Power Rangers. It's not going to be some goofishly looking monster. It's just going to be a bunch of minions that all look like Walkman. It's not going to be a big deal. Um, so we have that going on, and then we eventually have the monsters that are for the most time going to tie into the time, because when looking at it, like, we might have a inventor that watches a lot of the planet's TV. He might be catching up on this culture, and so maybe at some points in time there might be a monster here and there that does have a connection to the time period, but not everything is going to be that. Not every single thing is going to be a ha 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 to the time period. But if anything, there might be a popular item that came around within the 80s that we are going to reflect back on and have a good time joking around with. But for the most point, it's going to be a lot of monsters that are just kind of interestingly creatively done, and it's going to be like any normal Power Rangers like show. But we are going to have Zordon Sun that is really going to bring it to these Power Rangers, because ultimately he is 100% wanting this whole thing to get resolved. He's not going to be a person that is just going to sit back on some throne and after so many defeats, he is just going to go like, well, I guess I guess this is defeat number 801. Like, well, what are we going to do now? No, he is eventually going to desperately figure out how to beat these characters, running through a bunch of creators to come up with ideas, desperately coming up with any number of things from future knowledge to take these people down, and whatever and what have you. Basically, this guy is going to use anything that he can use to his disposal to take these people down. And he ultimately might have to come up with rare, unique weapons from any time period to ultimately get this thing done. Because ultimately, when looking at it, there are times when I think we could have extremely rare weapons that ultimately kind of tip the hat a little bit to certain kind of things. Like, my thought process would be like, let's have an Excalibrator. Instead of an Excalibur, we're gonna have an Excalibrator. So we're gonna have a sword that basically what ends up happening is this sword is powered by willpower. Like, it's not like a Green Lantern thing. It's different. Like, it's like we're gonna allude to, like, if this person has like some real like reason for getting this sword, that's when the power for this thing is so great. And more than likely, it might dip into the hands of the villains and ultimately might end up in the Power Rangers' defeat, or it could lead to the Power Rangers ultimately getting a weapon to maybe try to either use it every once in a while or completely 100% figure out a way to get rid of it. To maybe futurely, like, uh, time ported out to ultimately this thing is no longer a issue within this time period. So, yeah, some interesting things like are going to go on. Basically, there's going to be a lot of chess moves going on within this season. There are going to be a lot of desperation measures. So the season, this series or season or whatever, should be really exciting, because it's not just going to be, oh, okay, well, the villains are just going to like welcome defeat every single episode. Hey, look, there's a Megazord. Oh, you're going to bring the sword down and slice. No, there are real desperation like measures between both people to get everything right. And so it's not just going to be the normal welcoming of defeat like any normal Power Ranger season that you've ever seen in your life. No, it's not going to be that at all, because I'm kind of sick of that. I'm like, I want everything to matter. I want everything to, like, not have a revolving door of, hey, if you go into any episode, like, it's like it doesn't matter. Everything is the exact same, and nothing ever changes. I want every episode to matter. Even if it's like, well, yeah, but what if it's like a 40 episode season? Like, man, what if somebody just catches it late? Doesn't matter. If it's a streaming service, you can watch from episode 1 and make your way up. Um, so yeah, hopefully you catch this season and you like it, or otherwise you're gonna have to backpedal and whatever. Because ultimately, every episode is going to matter, and it should have for I don't know how long. But it started to just kind of repetitively not matter, and so like no one really cared about the show anymore because the shows never got to anything or did anything that made any rational importance. So ultimately, with that, I'm still mulling over this thing. So ultimately, there might be a lot of ideas that I change. Ultimately, some people might not be happy about certain choices that I've made. A lot of people will ultimately say, like, no, I hate this season. I don't like that you're tipping the hat from any number of these certain seasons because these certain seasons were dumb or stupid or whatever. When looking at it, I'm sure a lot of people, and even so, um, basically, I think Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is still a really trending season, even so via YouTube. Basically, it comes down to like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and then whatever is the newest season, and then it comes down to I think Power Rangers Samurai is still pretty popular. But other than that, it just kind of breaks down to just anything Power Rangers at some point also could be like an interesting thing for a person. So, like, I'm not doing that like viciously to just like, yeah, I'm still trying to push as much Power Ranger stuff out. No, I just find it fun for me to just talk about all this and put something out there into the ether that I don't even know is actually going to make any lick of sense or ultimately just justifiably is a stupid video that I did at one point and won't make any lick of views. But I don't know, with any of this Power Ranger stuff, like even videos that I didn't think would go anywhere, like have kind of done a couple views. So I'm so like appreciative of all that. And at the end of the day, I just want to say I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.